Hello and welcome to the birth of a new dimension. My name is Aurora. The new dimension that we have all collectively given birth to is the next experience of matter. So up until this point, we've been solidified light. Matter is solidified light. Matter is light that has the privilege of going slower than the speed of light. And what we've been experiencing is an artificial bifurcation in terms of matter versus energy, or self versus context. And self is this sense of your inner ego structure, where your ego is like a membrane that separates you from, or individuates you from the rest of everything else that is there. And this fiction that matter and energy, or consciousness and matter, are separated. So this idea that matter and consciousness are separated has led to this idea of objective materialism that basically says what we see with our five senses, the world around us, is simply the world around us, and the act of observership or thinking about the world does not affect the world. And that was a step up from levels of superstition that were, like in the dark, what is known as the Dark Ages in Europe. So objective materialist viewpoint and scientific method. That was a huge improvement over the idea of just rampant, let's call it emotion-based superstition. People could make totally baseless accusations about someone else and simply accuse them of witchcraft or some kind of supernatural activities, and that this was, the legal basis for killing many people. The objective materialist viewpoint was definitely an improvement over that. However, it also represents further constraints or bars on the cage, because if all we're going to talk about are what we can see with, or is what we can see with our five physical senses, then it means that we are ignoring a huge level of reality. So hundreds of years later, in the early 1900s, the quantum scientists started to become more sophisticated and share that understanding with the scientific community. And what they shared was the idea that observership affects reality. Sorry about all of this. I have a little bit of lingering stuff from a flu from last week. Everybody's been going over the flu here. So the idea is that our perception, not just our eyes and our ears, but all of our feeling, all of our perception affects reality. That we are not separate from our reality at all. And that it's been a fiction up until this point to believe that one is separate from one's reality. So many, many times on this radio show, I've said all about how we are so connected to our environment. And this is the idea that you have microbes that live internally within your body, like lining your digestive tract. And then you also have microbes that are totally coating the surface of your skin and inside of all of your pores. And then wherever you're sitting, like sometimes I do my little broadcast from my garden. I'm in my studio right now, but if you're sitting with your bare feet on the ground in your garden, there's literally no difference between your foot and the planet that you are touching. That you have microbes on the outside of your skin, on your big toe, that touch and communicate with the microbes that are on the top level of the surface of the soil of the planet that you're interacting with. And also, all of the food that you eat, can only exist due to microbial action, the microbes unlocking the micronutrients that plants require, and also your own personal digestion relying upon microbes, and all of let's talk about photons. So this is also speaking to this idea that some people have of their bodies being burdensome and simply wanting to be free, like, hell gone, take me away. This escapism, because people are recognizing that their bodies have been distorted from their original purpose. So yes, I recognize that right now the human form, what most people are experiencing, is burdensome because of its diminished functioning. So it's discomfort, there's dis-ease, or lack of comfort, and that dis-ease also extends into decrepitude, which is loss of vitality as we travel through time, and ends in eventual death. And none of that was the original blueprint for what our bodies were supposed to be like. So the original design of our bodies were more like wonderful perpetual motion machines that could carry our consciousness through time without any degradation. without any friction, without any loss of energy, without any entropy. So this is the idea that, we would come into the physical form, still maintain our connection to higher dimensional, less dense realms. And there's an organizing principle that comes from those higher dimensional, less dense realms. And the principle is akin to music or music theory. It's like the basic structure upon which all of the molecular aspects of reality are created. And all of that is incredibly beautiful and harmonically perfect. And what happened about 10 or 20,000 years ago was a degradation of the human genome. And your genes, our genes, are like antennae that both send and receive. And it's literally the level of reality that you are tuning into based upon the structure of your antenna and the behavior of your genes. So genes have behavior. Genes are not flat, static objects. They're not just X-shaped chromosomes. They are literal vibrating strings, just like the vibrating strings of a musical instrument. And they're constantly changing and shifting and twisting and morphing and doing the Watusi and do-si-doing. And so when science at Earth's level right now observes genes, it totally does not recognize their behavior. It doesn't have the sophisticated enough equipment to observe them in real time. For the most part, they are coming up with equipment that can do this. But mostly what science does is take a snapshot of genes in a particular moment, and it doesn't even recognize the unusual characteristics, like the dance movements, the postures that it is creating in that moment. What it does is it looks at basic ingredients. It's like if you were saying, what is cake made out of? Let's say it's this many ounces of flour and this many ounces of sugar and this many ounces of eggs, and that is the definition of what cake is. But we all know from eating cake, like cake is very more than just its constituent elements. It's a sensation. There's a feeling of it in your mouth, and there's a nourishment when it goes into your body. So the same thing with your DNA. It's much more than just a recipe, like a little bit of adenine, a little bit of guanine, and a little bit of the other guys thrown in, and then you get you in the right proportions. It's like, no, it's not that at all. And so the idea is identical twins do not develop identical diseases. This is called epigenetics. It is the phenomenon of a code that rules the code. So just because you do have something written in your DNA does not mean that it will necessarily become manifested, because there is an overarching organizational principle that determines what potential is manifested into reality. And this is also part of our experience of moving through time. So a couple of big takeaways that I stress or emphasize all the time. Our DNA and its dance behavior, its movement, its behavior, is what ties us from moment to moment. And we could think of this like we're on a timeline that's like, like a line of train cars, and that each moment is a train car, and each train car is separated, from the other ones by, the Planck length, like the smallest piece that you can chop a piece of cake into and still call it cake, like the smallest molecule. So we have these moments that are separated by these little slices of time in the smallest increments that we can do it and still call it time. And that what we are doing is transferring our consciousness from moment to moment, from train car to train car. So, whatever, I've been speaking here on my little recording for maybe like 10 minutes or so, we are all not in the same body that we were in 10 minutes ago. Our consciousness has been seamlessly transferred from moment to moment to moment, like a little bouncing kangaroo bouncing along on this timeline, and that the activity of our DNA is what causes that jumping motion through time. So what happens, so objective materialists are very willing to observe and recognize that we have a physical body, but your physical body is much more than just your physical body, because it's got all this other stuff that animates it, that makes you move, that makes you not only walk and talk and think, but makes you move through time. And if you get rid of all that extra stuff that's invisible, that science doesn't always recognize or perceive, you no longer have movement through time, and what you have is a corpse. So if you're just looking at the physical level of a body, you're pretty much just studying a corpse and not recognizing that all of the things that make something, a person, a piece of, whatever potential, be alive is to negate or, ignore, not to pay attention to a huge level of reality. So we have this aspect of self that is made out of time, and it's made out of possibilities and probabilities. So possibilities, this is anything that could possibly occur. Like right now, sitting in my studio, there's some very far distant peripheral possibility where a crocodile flies in through my window and bites my head and then I die. But clearly that hasn't happened, because although it might be a possibility, it is far to the periphery. It is very unlikely. What is much more likely is that I will safely, transfer my consciousness through time on this timeline for the next hour or so and complete my recording of this radio show, and then go and have a little dinner and take my dog for a walk. Like, those are much more likelihoods. So that is probability. So we have in this music of time, in the potentials of what is written into the time field, we have different things, the things that could possibly happen, and then the likelihood that they will possibly happen. And it is the dance movements of our DNA that place us in a particular position into like an edifice of reality to have certain experiences. And you can have unlikely experiences, but in order to have those unlikely experiences, it requires focus and intent and willpower. Essentially, your willpower puts you onto those timelines where you are then experiencing certain events. So this approach in understanding is very different than the idea of genetic fatalism, or even fatalism in general. Like in some people's religion, the idea that a distant external God is creating reality for you, and that you simply have to walk through your paces and do all the things that this external deity has created for you. It's like there's a big scriptwriter that wrote your life, and you're just walking through the paces and saying the right things. And then there are the idea that some people have, that if a disease is written into your genetic code, or some aspect of health or vitality is written into your genetic code, you are fated to experience it. So it's like, if mommy or daddy had heart disease, then you will have heart disease, or mommy or daddy had cancer, then you will have cancer. It's written in your genes and there's nothing you can do about it. And both of those standpoints are very disempowering and rather depressing, because it means that you, as the first person experiencer, have very little control over what you are experiencing. And I know that it's also erroneous, because what we are intended to experience here while we are submerged in physical matter is not merely being like, an automaton that has to follow the script that someone else wrote for you, or, a musician that must play each note as it is written in the musical score. We are intended to be divine miniature co-creators. We're supposed to be here on the ground, like we are a divine being that is removed from the physical reality position, like in an expansive, on a grand scale. And we're also supposed to be here experiencing the minutiae, firsthand from the ground. We're boots on the ground. And it's not supposed to be that there's a bifurcation or a separation between these two aspects of self. It's all supposed to be you, like you're the divine. You wrote this story for yourself, you created the edifice for yourself, and now you're here experiencing that edifice, or living that dream, if those words are more palatable. And in the dream, you're still the dreamer. You still get to contribute. Or it's like saying you're a jazz musician and you've been given a certain amount of notes that are like what you start off with. In jazz music, you start off with the basic structure. And then you get to choose if you want to riff around a little bit, if you want to change that structure a little bit. And you have to be a real expert. If you're a jazz musician, you have to know, I know this note says to play an A over here, but I know I can play a C and it'll sound just as good. Or I can play an A in a different octave and it'll sound just as good. So you have to be more engaged than just an automaton following each note that is written on, like I must play the A because it is written in the score. So it requires a lot more taking of personal responsibility in order to say that each one of us is a divine miniature co-creator in the moment, that this is it. We are in real time, all the time, using our perception in order to create reality around us, and we get to add a great deal of our own flavor or our own a particular approach, just like if you're a musician or an artist and you're painting a painting. It's a self-portrait. I have this theory, like all artwork is a self-portrait of the artist, including that guy that submerged like a shark in a bunch of formaldehyde, like that he's externalizing something that is internal to him and showing it to everyone. So when we are all artists, and we are artists of perception. So that means the very act of perceiving. This goes back to what I was saying about the quantum scientists in the early 20th century, that they understood mathematically and got everyone else on board to understand that the act of perception is an artistic act, just like painting a painting. That each one of us, when you look around your room right now, or if you're sitting outside or driving down a road, whatever, when you look around you right now, you understand you're not looking at walls, you're not looking at a table, you're not looking at a road. You are looking at a set of possibilities and probabilities. It's a giant sea of uncollapsed waveforms of an abstract potential. And it is your act of perceiving that actually creates that potential into experienced reality. And we have to take responsibility in that activity of taking potential and manifesting it as reality. So if you do not enjoy what you are experiencing in terms of your personal body, like how your body looks or feels or behaves, or if you're not enjoying your experience relative to your context. You might be like, my body is great, but I'm standing in the middle of the road and there's a Mack truck approaching and soon it's going to squash me. Like that also means you have to take responsibility for all of the actions and creating the edifice that led you to being standing in the middle of the road with the oncoming traffic. Sorry, my voice sounds so crappy today. All of this means is, in order to experience a better reality, I do not suggest to anyone that you pray to an externalized deity. Please do not misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying like, oh, don't pray, God is dead. That's not what I'm saying. Because the truth is, God is very real. God is very real and very profound, and God cares about God's creation to such an extent, like on such a deep level, that God is in every single atom, every single molecule, every single photon, and definitely in the first person driver's seat experiencing what we are all experiencing and what we are all creating. So because people have this sense of like being abandoned right now on earth, is what I'm trying to say. A lot of earthlings have this feeling of being abandoned. Like there's a lot of crap going on. It's very uncomfortable. And everyone says, where is God? Where are the angels? Where's the good guys? We can definitely see the bad guys. What's going on here? And my answer is almost always, God is very real and God is very present and God is inside of each one of us. And what we need to do is claim our identity as these divine co-creators. Be a jazz musician. So it's really also very challenging. Like if you're on earth right now, we're facing a big difficulty, and it's also one of the most satisfying things that you can do is to resolve this difficulty and transcend. So I'm all about transcending, and what I use is this shape that I invented that is called the flying rainbow lasagna. So I know it's a funny word. When I invented it and I named it that, I didn't say, let me name this thing the most awkward phrase imaginable so that people won't be able to fit it into their ear holes. That's not what I thought. I thought like this thing looks exactly like a flying rainbow lasagna. That's why I named it that. And I think you can also tell from this, like, I'm definitely a cultural outsider. I'm not from around here. So yeah, if you're new to my broadcasts, I'm a star person. I came literally from the stellar network, from a level of consciousness abstraction, not in a body. I'm not usually in a body. So I had to learn all sorts of things about being in a body, about eating food, about this cultural context, about this economic context. And then I had to learn about how people perceive me based upon my appearance, based upon my gender. Like it's so funny, guys. Like I can tell you, I remember the first time that someone condescended to me because I was a woman, and also because, I was relatively young at the time, like some old dude that kind of like, he couldn't believe that I had painted the paintings that I made. And I was just like, okay, like now I'm understanding the place that I'm at. So most of my hilariously fish out of water anecdotes, most of my stories about not fitting in have been due to that basic like lack of understanding, not getting how people operate on this anthropomorphic level in this time and place and not understanding my context relative to their preconceptions. So I have tons of hilarious fish out of water stories, but I've been here for about 17 years at this point, and so I've gotten a lot better at understanding and integrating with this socioeconomic paradigm, and I'm not here to preserve the status quo. Far from it. I'm here to transform my own physical structure and my own perception structure on a profound level, and doing that like the changes radiate outward and affect everyone. So this gets now into interdimensional ethics. Because each one of us is like, a musician, or your body is an instrument and you're filled with vibrating strings, and your strings affect the people around you. They affect your own internal microbes and, all of the plants and animals and microbes that are around you. And even if I never did a radio broadcast, even if I never opened my mouth, even if I just sat quietly in a corner, just, like sitting with my legs, cross-legged, and I never ever said anything in my whole entire 17 years of being here, I would still be emanating this music of my DNA and affecting everyone else that is here. And not just anything that has DNA, but anything that can feel a vibration. So like our planet has a vibration. It has the Schumann resonance. This is like the resonant cavity between the surface of Earth, where you plant your plants in the soil, and the stratosphere. That Earth rings like a bell and has a particular tone that it makes, and it makes music, and that we are also affecting that tone and being affected by that tone. So on Earth, hold on a second. On Earth, different organisms are analogous to different organs in the physical body. So we could say that trees and plants in general are analogous to the lungs, and they're even shaped, trees are shaped like alveoli, the branching structure they're like the lungs of the planet, and the ocean is like the blood of the planet. And in this analogy, humanity is like the neurons. We're like the brain of the planet. And so now let's go back to ancient Atlantis. I speak about this a lot here on my radio show. So I call ancient Atlantis the sophisticated antediluvian worldwide culture, because it wasn't just on one continent named Atlantis. It was a culture that was worldwide, and everyone who was here, who was part of that Atlantean culture, we were like imagine sophisticated inhabitants of New York City. New York City, even though it's a tiny island, you can eat anything from any flavor, any ingredient from any place around the world. You can eat that type of food there because it's so international. And also you have connectivity. Like you can phone someone or video chat with someone who lives across the world. It's not like you can only speak with your neighbors. That is what the antediluvian culture was like. Pre-flood or pre-fall, before everybody lost their telepathic capacities and was genetically degraded. We all had telepathy, and we could speak to each other in this time and place without the need for cell phones. And we also were telepathic with far distant societies, being able to be like sophisticated galactic citizens. You can call up Hong Kong, you can call up Australia, you can call up any place you want. Well, we could call up any place we wanted and speak with beings that are in far distant places. So what is going on right now on this planet is in a lot of ways the rectification of what was lost with the fall of Atlantis, which is really the fall of consciousness or the degradation of our human genome. So yeah, we used to be not only telepathic, but we used to be able to receive all of the nourishment that we needed directly from the sun and the stellar network without requiring intermediaries like chloroplasts to turn photons into starches that we can actually eat and put in our tummies. So our bodies have been transformed and repurposed. Your digestive tract is actually not meant to be the home to 3 to 5 trillion gut bacteria that help to, probiotically ferment and digest your food for you. That's not actually what you were intended to do, but this has become our workaround in order to be able to be here when we lost access to those higher faculties. So a lot of what we're doing right now on this planet is compensating for that loss, and that loss derives from a literal invasion by a technology using space race that I can only describe as satanic. And satanic does not refer to anything from the human Bible. This refers to a type of technology, an exotic or non-Earth-based technology that these particular space races use, and that runs on distorted and hijacked or repurposed DNA. So you understand that there's a sophisticated, exotic grouping of many different space races that figured out how to take the ordinary genetic behavior or genetic dance and transform it from its natural dance into an aberration. And this aberration is what we're presently experiencing. That is a diminishing of our connection to the divine, a diminishing of our own self-identity as a divine creature, and a diminishing of the capacity to create intentionally with our perception. So basically, our reality creation mechanisms have been hijacked, and your reality creation mechanism is called your imagination. Many people right now suffer from what people call anxiety, but anxiety is like the unintentional repurposing of imagination to begin thinking about and creating and manifesting all of the things that you don't want. And this is because the mind has become like spastic or not in control of the owner-operator, that there are spasms that make the mind, which is part of the reality creation mechanism, think about things that you don't want to think about. Like think about someone I love is dead in a ditch somewhere, or, a giant meteor is going to destroy the earth, or any of these destructive scenarios. So this goes back to possibilities and probabilities. Just because there's a possibility that a crocodile flies in my window and eats my head does not mean that that is going to happen. In fact, why would I even think about that possibility? Why would I not instead think about the possibility of some wonderful and equally unlikely thing happen? Like a unicorn flies in through my window and I jump on its back and we do something super fun, like whatever, like gallop on a sea of rainbows. I'm just thinking of the opposite of something evil and painful. So why don't we think about that? And the answer is because we have a hacked operating system. The human daily waking intellect and the ego structure as it presently exists, it's hacked. Humans didn't create it. Humans are using it, just like you didn't create your Microsoft Windows, operating system on your computer. You downloaded it and you use it, and it was made by a big company, and you using that software benefits that big company, but it does not necessarily benefit you. Same thing with the human mind. The very same beings that invaded our planet, degraded the human genome, caused the fall of consciousness, and twisted and distorted the natural behavior of DNA on this planet, those are the beings that created the human operating system. Those are the beings that created the human mind. So what they did was they degraded human genetic capacities, took away the capacity to see through time and be telepathic and eat sunlight directly, and essentially domesticated humanity in the same way that humanity domesticated dogs from wolves. Nothing against dogs. I have a beautiful little chihuahua and I hug her every day, but I also recognize that she's not a wolf, that she requires baths and, I got to clip her little nails and you got to brush her coat, and we do all these different things for her that are not necessary for a wild, undomesticated wolf that is quite capable of taking care of itself, hunting for itself, doesn't have to eat dog food that I feed it. So humans in their wild, undomesticated format are miniature gods. Like, there is no need for an external deity to protect you, to nourish you, to tell you what to do, to keep you on a leash, to keep you safe. None of that is necessary. But humans right now crave that because humans are domesticated, and humans have this sense of inner unworthiness and not confusion, not knowing where to go. So humans pray to an external deity and they say, external deity, help me, guide me, give me stuff, nourish me. And when I'm telling you not to pray to an external deity, I'm not telling you not to pray. I'm telling you that you are the deity. You are God. So praying to something else as if it is not you is a distortion. And on this planet right now, what's happened is the very same invaders that degraded humanity also set themselves up as the gods of this planet. They're like, I am your God. First, what they do is cut off your connection to a true God, and then they put themselves up like some kind of plastic imposters. They're like, I am your God. Listen to me. Sacrifice your animals to me. Sacrifice your babies to me. And that's the first red flag. No God would be like, yeah, I require you, one of my creations, to destroy one of my other creations in order to honor me. that's totally illogical and doesn't make sense at all. And so, a lot of our earthly religions are based in animal sacrifice. So Judaism comes from a background of animal sacrifice. This is the way that the original Jewish tribes, 5,000 plus years ago, honored their God. God said to them, yes, the way that I want you to worship me is take an animal and cut its throat. And that is not honoring that's not how you honor life. So then we have to say, okay, what is the real agenda? And the real agenda is death. That these beings that invaded the human genome and implanted this harmful mental structure essentially created death. In Atlantis, nobody died. Nobody hit the membrane of death. We were all able to see down the road of time and understand and control our trajectory through the time field to the point that we could make it through that little tiny wormhole of possibility. It's the path of least likelihood. Like that crocodile eating my head is a very unlikely event, but there's something that's even less likely that can happen. And that is the idea of transcendence. The idea of becoming God, the idea of every single molecule in your body, every fiber of being in your body, kindling with awareness and being so, totally aware and totally connected that you return to a state of being pure light as opposed to light that is slowed down into matter. And that's what ascension is. So I know lots of New Age people use all sorts of different interpretations of ascension, and a lot of it is a Calgon take me away type of idea, like we're getting out of here, we're ascending, like screw you world. And that is not my understanding, because my understanding that it is a transformation of consciousness like caterpillar into butterfly. And the person who has transformed might no longer be perceptible or recognizable to those beings who have not transformed, because you need to get a new set of perception apparatuses. I don't know what the plural of that is, but you need to get the correct kind of eyes in order to see higher dimensional reality. So if you are still like a caterpillar living in the lower dimensional, more dense realm, then you've got eyes to see what's going on in that realm. And when people transform into butterflies and all of a sudden they're flying around far up above your head, you're like, they all disappeared. They must be dead. They're gone. They're not gone. They're right there, but they're on a different level of reality that you cannot necessarily perceive. So this also goes back to this idea of humanity feels abandoned. Humanity says, where's God? Where are the angels? The answer is God is here. God is internal. God is in every cell of your body. How about the angels? How about the ascended masters? Where are they? Why aren't they helping? And the answer is they're here. They're actually beyond a perceptual veil or beyond a frequency membrane, that in order for lower dimensional, and lower does not mean less valuable. Because in this capitalistic society, if something is lower in price, people think that's cheap. It's only $1. It's lower. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's more like lower in terms of the tone. It's a low note as opposed to a high note. And the lower dimensional perception can perceive what is going on in the physical realm. But when something or someone has transcended that level of physicality, then the physical eyes cannot necessarily perceive the higher dimensional, less dense, expanded version of that person. So then it's like, where is that person? And that, less dense, higher dimensional being is still active. It is not like a frozen being that isn't doing anything. I want to say dead. Like, it's not like an inert thing that is not doing something or not active or passive, something that is not experiencing thing. It's experiencing stuff. It's having an impact on the world. It's eating and metabolizing, but the food that it eats is very different. The food that butterflies eat is very different than caterpillar food. Butterflies drink flower essences while they flit from flower to flower, as opposed to caterpillars that munch lots and lots and lots of leaves. Butterflies do not eat leaves. They do not eat heavy, dense food. They eat like the essence of flowers that's, very highly refined. So what higher dimensional, less dense, transformed, transcended, experienced people, what they eat thought forms directly. This is what I'm trying to say. This is what Atlantis was like. We ate thought forms directly and everybody ascended. So the idea is you lived for as long as you wanted to in the material state. And material, this comes from the root word matter. I say this all the time, which is from mother. mother, meaning this is like our womb that is gestating us. So there's so much anger, and people are so unhappy because of the constraints of their present experience. That's why they're like, Calgon, take me away. They hate the material world. You don't have to hate the material world. It's just like if you're developing in the womb and it's a nice, healthy pregnancy, it's like, oh, good, you have your umbilical cord, you have everything that you need, and you're growing along the way, and you're doing what you need to do, and then you get born at the right time. But what's been going on for humanity is humanity has, been suffering in the womb and not receiving all of the nourishment that it requires in order to really grow, and also sometimes being stuck, being like, I want to get out of here, I'm not getting all the food I need, it's very cramped. And then how do we go? Where do we go? How do we get out of here? So this is the whole idea of transcendence at this point. And the tool that I've developed for transcendence is this hyperdimensional torus shape called the flying rainbow lasagna. So the torus is like a donut shape, and I think many people are familiar with this now. Many other teachers are exploring and sharing the idea of the torus. And it's like a shape that has an endless figure 8 within it. And if you map the skin of the torus, you can say it is covered with a series of events, and those events are like the final denouements or last moments of a movie, and they're also like the last, final culmination of an equation. Like 1 + 1 = 2. So that 2 would be written on the skin of the membrane. And the 1 + 1 or 3 + 12 or 20 million + 20 million, that set of calculations is actually your body. It's actually your body moving through time. You're a wonderful calculator. You might not know it. You are the owner-operator of a very sophisticated quantum calculator because you're exploring multiple possibilities in terms of your calculations. What happens if I add together this plus this plus this plus this plus this times 10 million, and then it equals this. It equals this final moment. You could say that all of the thoughts and experiences and beliefs and actions of your life all are like integers in an equation adding up to the final culmination of that exploration of reality. And again, we've been having to explore every single possible iteration or possible combination in order to try to solve the equation of how do you find eternal life. But in Atlantis, everybody knew how to solve the equation. So, I guess when some people get these multiple choice tests, one of the ways that people teach you to do it, it's like instead of actually doing the equation, you just take each possibility, like A, B, C, or D, and you plug it in. You'd be like, is this the right one? I don't know. Is this the right one? I don't know. Is this the right one? I don't know. It's like Groundhog's Day over and over. It's like, what is the way to do it? How do you get out of here? But there's a much more effective and elegant and direct way of doing it, which is to be able to actually perceive. So I used this example on the radio a couple of weeks ago. My studio sometimes is just a mess, and I got projects on the floor, and I got cardboard, and like here's a packing knife, and here's a sweater, and here's all this different stuff. It's if you were a blind person, it would be very difficult to simply navigate successfully walking across the floor. So let's say that you say, I'm going to use my logic and my reason to navigate across the floor without being able to actually perceive where the obstacles are. I'm going to say, well, it logically makes sense. There would be an empty space over here, and that any debris would be over there, and that based on how many times the packing knife has been left in this position, we will calculate that it has a likelihood of being here. Like, none of that is effective. We cannot use reason and logic to reason our way across the time field, because the time field, it's like a landscape, and it's constantly changing. It's constantly transforming. Just like my studio, sometimes there's a sweater in the middle of the floor, but sometimes it's, sitting on a chair. Sometimes the chair is over here. Sometimes the lamp is over here. It's in all different sorts of places. And the time field is alive. It is an alive embroidery, and it has metabolism, and it changes and it shifts. So to use logic and reason to say, oh, well, we should go in this direction. I should, fly my mind on this timeline over here because there's a blah, blah percentage chance that it will be a good place to go to. Like, none of that works. What you need to do is cultivate your higher faculties, the very thing that the genetic squashing removed. It was done very intentionally in order to say, hey, you can no longer directly perceive time, so you don't know what the heck direction to go. So you're going to have to explore every single possible road until you find the actual pathway to get out of this level of reality. But if you can see, you don't have to explore every possible pathway. You can take the pathway that leads to the wormhole or the doorway out of here. It's the singularity. So getting together your higher faculties is essential. And so the way that we do this through Flying Rainbow Lasagna, this hyper-torus, means that you begin to vibrate the torus, or the structure around your body that is made out of time, so that it is superpositioned. And you can overlap not only two, but we'll just use two in this example. You can overlap at least two versions of reality. So, I'm sitting here in my chair, one version of reality, I finish completing this recording and then walk my dog. But in another version of reality, crocodile flies in my window and bites my head off. And we can superposition those two possibilities, and we can take a little bit from like a mashup, the way that they do music nowadays. Like the Beastie Boys, you can have a little bit of this hip-hop beat, and then you can take a few bars of a sample of an old Jimi Hendrix song, and then you can go back to the hip-hop beat. It's being able to mix together two different versions of reality. But what if it's more than two? I said at least two. What if it's 20 million? What if you have 20 million, 20 billion possible versions of you in this moment? And through Flying Rainbow Lasagna, what you can do is take the most favorable aspects of each of those 20 million versions of you and take the tastiest tidbits out of each of those versions and put them together into one consolidated version of you, and that's what you experience. So let's now apply this to the planet, because we got a big fat mess on the planet. We can say that there are all these different possibilities in our planet moving forward, everything from total destruction, like destruction of Earth on a profound level, destruction of the biosphere and all life that's on Earth, to what would be considered like a utopian fantasy. Everybody lives in peace and harmony. Everybody lives like in Atlantis. Everybody lives an expanded lifespan for as long as they choose to live, until they choose to transcend this level of experience, and everything in between. Those are all the 20 million, billion, trillion possibilities of what this planet can be experiencing. And if we Flying Rainbow Lasagna, what we do, and it's a verb, Flying Rainbow Lasagna is a verb. I know it's a very funny word. You can take the best aspects of all of these possibilities out of the time field and consolidate them or overlap them, so that that's what we are experiencing. So a big part of what I teach. Oh, and I teach a class, free plug for me, please enroll. It's called Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans. You can find the easiest way to find the enrollment links is go to my website, which is flyingrainbowlasagna.com. It's lasagna with an E on the end. And I have a series of recorded lessons that I do on an interactive whiteboard that teaches the basics of all of this. It's like music theory, starting with the beginning and moving up to how to become a genetic virtuoso. And it's way more than I can describe with merely my voice, which is why I do the recorded whiteboards, and I use a lot of diagrams and pictures. It's why I draw. It's why I make my artwork. And although I enjoy my radio show very much, so I encourage everyone to check out, enroll in. You can first check out the lessons that are enabled for free preview, and also I have the most relevant, important information enabled for free, so that you can watch it even if you have $0. But if you have money, you can enroll, and if you have no money, you can still enroll. You can ask me for a scholarship or something like that, and tuition isn't that big. Like, you can become a student for $25 a month on my Patreon. So I don't do I'm not an advertiser, because you know something, I gotta tell you guys, I find marketing to be very manipulative, and I'm not about manipulating other people. I'm really very straightforward and very forthright. I'm like, hey, here are my thoughts. Hey, here's what I'm thinking about. I'm actually most interested in sharing ideas and cross-pollinating, and I don't want to have to say, hey, I'll give you this if you'll give me this, and I'm going to twist your arm and you'll do this for me. Like, that's that whole old paradigm type of approach that is totally not my approach. So you can tell it's been it's another fish out of water thing. It's been a huge uphill battle to try to share my work professionally, because it's like I don't use my Jedi mind tricks to try to convince someone that they have to buy my stuff. So it's boring to me. That is a very boring use of my mind, that what I would much prefer is to reach into other people's minds and share these technicolor, incredibly brightly saturated, vivid, precise polygons and shapes and forms, that's what I would much rather spend my mental energy connecting with your mind. I don't want to like make you want to buy stuff. That's like, advertising. Advertising's like, buy my lipstick, buy my car. And that is very boring, low level stuff. So yeah, so I'm way more forthright. I'm like, hey, here's this stuff. Check it out. Buy it if you can. If you can't afford it, I'll give it to you. Because the other stuff is that it's incredibly important information and it's very empowering. And up until this point, I've said like, hey, we are literally in the process of birth, like a woman laboring to deliver her little tiny infant. So I'm not going to keep as a secret, how to give birth effectively, or, what do you do? How do you cut an umbilical cord? How do you deliver a placenta? Like, we all kind of need to know about all of this stuff. And also, we're moving into this new level of reality. This is birth of a new dimension. And in this new level of reality, we are overt collaborators creating reality. Up until this point, we have been unintentional collaborators, and most people have been so disempowered that they don't even recognize that their mind is having an impact on reality. But now we're at the level where we're like, wait a minute, way beyond what the early 20th century quantum guys said. It's not just, oh yes, the double slit experiment and I'm collapsing waveforms. It's like I'm literally making things happen with my mind. Not just me, all of us. When I say I, like when I say things like I am God, I hope that you all turn that statement around and that you say, I am God. I hope that everybody who's listening to this understands, like, we are all creating this reality. So right now, coming out of the world, the paradigm of disempowerment, we've created a very horrible reality where wealth is concentrated in the hands of very few people who are very cold and heartless, who do not care about other living things, who do not care about the planet itself. Like, it's self-destructive to a profound level that any billionaire would be like, yes, I will use my billions in order to degrade the planet because I live on the planet. Like, why would they degrade their own home? It's totally illogical. But I understand that I'm in this world that is largely illogical and highly self-destructive. If we look at the way that people act, like, people smoke tobacco, people do all sorts of self-destructive things, and they have all sorts of justifications for it. It's not logical. And so there's a huge emotional component as to why someone who lives on this planet would possibly degrade the healthy functioning of the body that you live on. None of it makes sense, but I understand that we're in a nonsensical world that needs profound healing. So you begin by cleaning up your own life. You begin by cleaning up your own body. So it's totally a story of empowerment, of self-empowerment, and also it doesn't cost any money to do the flying rainbow lasagna dance. It's a new dance that you do with your DNA in order to restructure reality. It's just like playing the piano or being a violin virtuoso. It takes time to practice, so it's expensive in terms of time and consciousness and focused energy and belief in yourself. However, it is not expensive in terms of, having to, like, whatever, I pay $10 a month to be able to use Photoshop software. It's not like that. It's not like, oh, I pay this much money to go to the grocery store and get this many calories. It's not like that. So what we need is a safe place to live while we go through this process of transformation, and all the things to support our physical body, like food and water and medicine and, safety and healthcare products and everything like that. But you do not have to pay someone a subscription fee or have a magic elixir. It's none of that. All of these like stories, like alchemical stories or stories about someone finds a magic rock or whatever that transforms them, fountain of youth, all of those types of connections and integument. It's not like that. It's a concept. So flying rainbow lasagna is a food for your mind, and I offer it to everyone, and I would like to receive the credit as its originator, as its innovator. And, I definitely would like to have people buy my original artwork or, buy reproductions of my work and, enroll formally and pay tuition to my classes. But it's not like I ask you every month, like, you got to pay me $20 a month and then you're allowed to do the flying rainbow lasagna. It's not like that at all. In fact, I want everybody to do the flying rainbow lasagna. I want everybody here to become a genetic virtuoso so that we are all making much better music and much more beautiful versions of reality. Because if I'm the only person who is tuning up my personal instrument of my body and then sending out these improved versions of reality, my life gets better, but everyone else, like children are still being born with brain cancer, children are still eating off of garbage heaps in order to stay alive. Like there's still all this degradation. So I would not consider it to be a wonderful, great, like if you were like, okay, Aurora, here's your multi-million-dollar mansion in a gated community, and here's your bank account, and here's your, special food store where you go and eat your food, but then nothing else changes, and we still have, so much suffering and so much poverty and so much starvation everywhere else. I would not consider that to be the pinnacle or the culmination or the transcendence. I would be like, wow, this is a really mediocre situation because I might be more comfortable sitting on my golden toilet seat, but what about everyone else who's here? Because everyone else who's here is actually part of the music too. It's all a big, giant symphony. And so if there's suffering and degradation and lack of freedom in the symphony, it's affecting all of us. So the real answer is that in order for me to really feel like this mission is a huge success, we need to all improve our personal existences. And it takes time to learn how to do the flying rainbow lasagna or learn how to effectively apply it to your life. So I had a friend back in Woodstock. This is like whatever I moved out of Woodstock 4 years ago. So you can understand how long ago this was. And it was also like kind of during the earlier part of my artwork when I wasn't as articulate about it as I am now. But I've always been making the artwork, but it's taken a long time for me to learn like the vocabulary words and how to express myself verbally on it. So I used to just invite people to my studio. I would show them things. I would blather on. I'd talk about all these different disjointed topics. And one of my friends, like after a certain point, I showed her an animation. She was like, "You've been talking about this to me for 5 years and I never understood what you were talking about. But finally, from watching that animation, I understand what you're talking about." So that helped me to understand like that it's such a new concept. This flying rainbow lasagna can be a challenge for people to even wrap their heads around. They don't know what it is, and that it might take time to percolate or gestate inside of them until one day they have that aha moment where they're like, "Oh, now I get it. I understand what she's talking about." So that is what it's like, and I think it's similar to any artistic pursuit. Like you might practice for many years at your piano or your violin, and it's very clunky and laborious, but at a certain point you have a breakthrough, and it's like, oh, look, now my fingers are just flying over the piano keyboard, and my pinky knows exactly where to go, and I don't have to labor at this anymore. I think it's the same thing with flying rainbow lasagna, which is becoming a genetic virtuoso. So all of us should be able to dance with our genes in whatever direction through the time field that we want. That's a big one. That's a big takeaway from this. Like, no one else is supposed to stop you from dancing in the directions you want to. And when you start to do the flying rainbow lasagna, there are all of these impediments that I predict will probably come up because they came up for me. Things like, mommy and daddy wouldn't want you to do this. Your ancestors wouldn't want you to do this. The president of the United States wouldn't want you to do this. Human society, human religion, like you're not allowed to do that. Whatever you do, don't press that button. Don't pull that lever. Don't transform in that direction. And you have to be like, no, you know something? I'm going to press that button. I'm going to transform in that direction. Because sometimes you might say, hey, your ancestors gave you a lot of genetic baggage. And trauma is passed down from generation to generation in the DNA. Your DNA is like, it's a long-term data storage plan, and you get a lot of ancestral trauma. And if you begin to heal that trauma, then your ancestors might say, but wait, you're letting go of your identity. Aren't you connected to us? That trauma is what makes us who we are. And you get the choice to say, no, actually, I'm not defined by the very worst things that have happened to me or those that I'm connected to. I'm defined by my response to the world. So, my response to all of this suffering that I see in the world and in my own experience, I paint these paintings that are beautiful and that are, the idealized world. And I don't paint paintings that are about bloody beheadings. We just got a little visit from my dog boss who managed to open up the door and jump on in. Usually I get a little bit of time before she wakes up from her nap, so I'm just finishing things up here. But as you begin to experience the profound healing of transforming your DNA in this generation, previous generations that have been riding along inside of you might say, why are you betraying us? Why aren't you carrying on your cultural identity, your religious identity, the identity of the trauma that's happened to you? And you get to say, hey, all of those bad things that happened to me in this life and in previous generations, they don't have to define who and what I am. And this is literally like, we don't have to wait for the next 20 generations in order to finally be free. Because of Flying Rainbow Lasagna, what this means is that in this generation, right now, at this moment in time, each one of us can be free. It's not like you have to change your DNA, change your sperm and your ovum, and then have a new baby, and then that baby has improved and expanded DNA, and then that baby transforms and it passes those traits on to its little baby. That's so long, that's so laborious, it takes a million years to change. Actually, I'm exaggerating, but it takes many generations to actually change things. What we can all do right now in this generation is release the collective, concentrated, distilled trauma that has come to us from, ancient Atlantis and everything afterwards, and be profoundly healed, and then be ready like a fresh piece of paper or a fresh canvas to draw a beautiful new reality upon. So this is the part of the transformation that's happening. So it's releasing family trauma. I think almost everyone in this world right now has experienced some level of abuse, physical or sexual or emotional abuse in their family, because we live on this satanic planet. No offense to anybody's family, because I know this is part of this. Like, when you start to transform, I predict that you will begin to see clearly some of the unhealthy dynamics in your own family. But then it's like, but wait, are you rejecting your family? Does it mean that you're not a part of them anymore? And it means that what you're doing is becoming your true self and your true identity, as opposed to the limited and constrained version of self that is the result of trauma or abuse or lack of whatever was not given to you properly. So we all get to be healed in this generation. We don't have to wait 20 generations to be healed. It doesn't have to be a long, slow, laborious process. And we also get to heal all of the infrastructure, like all of the social and economic infrastructure that is also satanic. Everything that we've got on this planet right now is a compensatory mode in response to the technology that invaded our planet. We didn't used to have to use technology in order to stay alive and thrive. And then beings that used technology came here and degraded us and degraded our planet, and then we had to use technology in order to stay alive. And that technology, part of it is language. I'm using the flapping of my moving mouth parts to share these ideas, but this is a form of degraded or debased technology that we have to use, or writing, the written word, or money as a symbol for value, that all of these things we use, but that they are not the intended format for how we were supposed to be able to experience this world. So also a brief aside on transforming into being a light eater. We're on the road to being light eaters. I do sun gazing every day, and I eat light as part of my diet, and I also eat plenty of physical food like bacon and eggs, and that's because in ancient Atlantis, when we were non-physical, like when we ate only non-physical light and non-physical thought presences, you don't eat nothing, you eat something, but the something is reflected in the environment around you. So the something is reflected in the perfection of the structure of the buildings and crystals that you have around you. So we need to totally change the way that we structure our society in order to be able to do that. So it's an ongoing healing process. I'm giving everyone tons of encouragement to keep going, like we really have turned a corner. And thank you for being with me on the journey.